what is it then about Muntons that has made this art of the possible, maybe inspire other people to give us awards, but not only that, to come and see what we're doing now. So we've got a science-based target. Now, the science-based target is that target where if we all reduced our carbon emissions by that particular amount, then the impact of the humans on the planet would be minimized and that the temperature wouldn't rise beyond what is deemed correct. So we've had a target of 45% reduction in emissions of scope 1 and 2. I guess I'm going to preach to the converted, but if you don't know what that is, that effectively means our use on site. And we're going to achieve that in 2022. That's actually 3 years early. Our scope 3 is everything that comes into us and everything then that goes out from us from the factory. We've already reduced that by 30% by working with the supply chain. And now we're looking for the next 30%. So it's very much, when you talk about a target, of course, the target gets you there, but that has been an absolute step change in our emissions performance. And the emissions performance, in fact, if you looked at it, people talk about, they whinge about government targets. The government target was actually only 18% in that same time. So we've actually said, well, that wasn't good enough. It wasn't going to get us to where we needed to be serious about having a science-based target. So setting that target did indeed open our eyes. How did we get there? Well, I designed the world's first carbon calculator for malt for scopes 1 to 3. In fact, my very first version of it, I was bet £10. I couldn't develop one in 2 weeks, and I did. And then Farmers Weekly told me it was the 3rd most used carbon calculator in the UK, which made me rather nervous. But I think what it showed was that people wanted simplicity. My calculator had 9 questions. The other one available had 120. And people, even like me, who was a sustainability professional, so people called me at that time, I couldn't understand some of those questions. And I think that was indicative of why it wasn't particularly working. So our strategy is to be carbon neutral by 2050. We're going to be carbon neutral long before 2050. As I say, we'll hit our science-based target in 2022. We will, of course, set another one. We won't just stay there. What was it that we found when we set our carbon footprint, first of all? We found that it didn't really matter whose model you used. People were out there at the time. I was getting a lot of opposition in the supply chain. Whenever I stood up, and you're going back to 2004, 2006, when I was first talking about these sort of things, I was even faced with a boycott when I went to Germany to speak about this. People said, we're going to get up and walk out if you mention carbon footprint. Why was it? They were very nervous about the types of data that was coming out. I said, look, here's a couple of models. The top 3 things are the top 3. That means that we know the areas we need to be working in. We need to be working on gas and electricity on our sites, no great surprise. But the thing that did surprise us was that the impact of barley growing was so high. We just didn't know that until we mapped the carbon footprint. And that led then to people in the supply chain for barley saying, so it's our fault. I said, when did I ever use the word fault? I want to know what I can do to work with you so that your embedded carbon is lower in my product. And although it took us 4 years to eventually find a way of talking to them, after that 4 years, we actually we released a press release between us and we got arms around each other. I mean, my goodness, how can you go? That just shows the way that you can go through this journey. Just put up with the flack and just keep saying that this is what we want to do. We want to find out how using the whole supply chain can make these changes, because we certainly couldn't make it by ourselves. Now, what I like about this is that when people say which model should you be using, everyone says that you should be paying many, many tens of thousands of pounds for models, but we found that the difference between the models was only about 6%. Now, I like flicking the figure. If you've heard me before, that means I'm 94% certain that this figure's correct. Now, how often are you 94% certain of what you do? I wish I was. But that means that we just move on. So yes, I'm saying that we can reduce our carbon footprint. Do I want to argue whether we've reduced it by 60%, by 61.5%, by 58%? I don't care. The fact is that I've then reduced it by about 60% when I know for a fact that other people in the supply chain have sat there since 2004 and have reduced by nothing. And that's what I think, the art of the possible. Move on and don't worry too much about accuracy. When we split that carbon footprint up for barley, we found that a lot of it was to do with the nitrogen fertilizer. The nitrogen fertilizer manufacturers were about to reduce part of their process by 90%. So we became one of their best publicity agents by saying, if you're going to produce fertilizer at the same price, but actually then with a 40%, by the time they'd finished, a 40% reduction, we're going to say that our customers must buy your fertilizer. And by doing that, we got a 30% reduction in our embedded carbon. The next thing is the nitrous oxide emissions from the soil. That, 20 years ago, seemed really, really difficult to get people to talk about it. We're at the point now where not only do we think we can control that, but we can actually turn that into a negative. That was, I'd have been locked up 20 years ago if I'd said that, but now it's actually possible. It's very important, of course, then to extend so that we don't just talk about carbon, and we've extended to taking the Sustainable Development Goals. In the interest of time, I won't go through all of those. I'm going to go through the race to zero, because all of those things that we're doing, they really do, in my mind, align very nicely with this government target. Many people said, aren't they crazy to set a target of 78% reduction by 2035? The initiatives that we've got in place, if you look at our 2010 emissions, we're going to be post 60% by 2022. So I don't think that it's out of line with what we need to do. I also don't think it's out of line with what's possible now. The way that we've approached this is then, and I'm really sorry I can't be with the presentations this afternoon, I'm hoping I'm going to be able to read these afterwards. We use this model of people, profit and planet, the triple bottom line. If you go into the boardroom, there is still the feeling that this stuff is tree hugging. It is absolutely not. One of the things I did last year was I now do 3 days a week for Muntons. I have my own consultancy called Malt Doctor. And that's really been helping businesses to understand that these words are not just words. You can use them and integrate them into your business systems, and you can describe it for the board in terms of risk. So this is de-risking their business if they look for energy saving and they look for alternate fuels. It happens to benefit the planet as well, and there are still too many executives out there that don't engage in environmental concerns. But just explain it to them in a different way and you get to the same point. And certainly in terms of people, we are now finding that more and more people are saying, because you've got a credible, sustainable performance, you're open about what you know and you're open about what you don't know. I can't see any point being any other way. We want to come and work for you, or we want to stay and work for you. And our customers are saying the same thing. So 35% of our business at present they have told us, they have chosen us because we have a sustainability record which is verifiable. It's open, and we've got data which we can prove. So it's really important. So when we're talking about the sustainable goals, we put specific words next to it. I don't suspect if you can read that, you're doing extremely well. I'm struggling to read it on here. But go to our website and download our sustainability report for this year, and you can read the details we put behind it. Now, that science-based target is a great thing. Over 1,000 companies have signed up to saying that they think science-based targets should drive the way a business works, but only 50% have actually set a target. So my challenge there is if you've done that, if you're in the camp of thinking it might be a good idea, well, sign up. If you're in the camp of having signed up and thinking I can't understand the figures, well, they're not that difficult, really. You've seen the sort of accuracy that you need. Why should you have a science-based target from a business perspective? Well, 63% of company executives say that it drives innovation. It does. I'd been sitting there probably for 20 years thinking that originally the DEC target and the climate levy targets of 18% were really, really difficult. And then I looked and said, well, the science-based target wants me to save more than 50%? Well, that's just silly, isn't it? It made me look at alternatives, and I found those alternatives. 35% will tell you that it increases your resilience against future legislation. It absolutely does, because you're ready for it, and you can talk with enthusiasm when you go to the government departments. We went into what was DEC before, and they wanted to give us a 17% extra target. And we said, so where are these initiatives coming from? Which things that we haven't put in place are you telling us we should? They said, well, we haven't got any. So I said, so it's a 0% target. They said, no, come on, we can't go back to Treasury with that. How about 1? So we said, how about a half? And we shook hands. And that was the way we found that it's good to be really open, because you can get a benefit from being open about your data. And definitely 55% of executives say it gains a competitive advantage. It absolutely does. Now, when you're explaining carbon footprint to people, here's one from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. What is it about a carbon footprint that shouldn't scare you? Well, if you have a look at the figures here, when I look at this, I get an invoice for my gas use, which is 34%, and an invoice for my electricity use, which is 6%. So therefore, I'm 100% accurate on 40% of that data. Move on. When I look at the 60% which comes from the malting barley, which comes in to me, I was struggling 20 years ago because there wasn't a calculator. Having developed that calculator, and then there's about 3 different variations of that calculator since, I know I'm now within 6% accuracy on that. So that's pretty high. So for over 90% of my emissions, I know I'm pretty accurate. So therefore, I don't have to worry about the thing which your inbox will be filled with day in, day out of consultants, not like me, consultants trying to charge you 30, 40,000 pounds and frightening the life out of you, saying you need to calculate your scope 3 when it leaves your factory. You do. But what do? I don't do that. I use the financial model which is available, which predicts your scope 3 indirect emissions downstream. I don't care if I'm 100% inaccurate in that. I won't be. But I'm only for 3%. Is it going to be 3% or 6%? Do I care? No, I don't. I'm happy that I know the 90%. And that's why when we developed this carbon footprint calculator here, as you can see there, it was very simple. In fact, it was 9 questions. I did better than the 10 questions I was set. It helped farmers understand it was about fertilizer use. It wasn't about going to buy a new tractor, which might have been fun, but it wasn't going to save you much in terms of carbon footprint. And that then meant that we could specify to our supply chain that they needed to use abated nitrogen fertilizer, and we got that 30% lower barley carbon footprint. I'll quickly go through this because it's been mentioned this morning, but my view here is that when we talk about legislation has driven, I think it was 44% mentioned this morning, called it 38 to 44% reduction in emissions in that time period. It's estimated by reports that 40% of this has come through legislation. What does that tell me? That tells me that 60% of the time, business thought it was the right thing to do. So that again is, don't wait for the legislation to make you do it. 60% of the time, business should be able to see for itself it's the right thing to do. And when the report comes out that we see net zero, it's really not helpful for the many businesses that came out, and you see a sort on social media calling it the not zero report. Immediately knocking it and saying, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. There's lots you can't do, but hopefully I've shown you in a couple of examples, there's a lot that you can do, and you should be doing it. Now, when we get very techie, you can, of course, report this data out there, and you can put some pretty big figures on how we've reduced scope 1, 2, and 3. You can tell people exactly how it is, which part of your supply chain scope 3 comes from. But the biggest thing to me is, what are you doing to get it down? So if I sat there back in 2007 and with our emissions for Muntons at 50-odd thousand and said it was going to come down to just under 10, between 6 and 10, I would have thought, you can be locked up, you've been a straitjacket. But we found ways to do it with existing technology. So the first one we put in was an anaerobic digestion plant, which took our waste, because we have a brewery effectively. If we fermented it, we'd be as big as Green King. But we don't ferment, we just make malt extract, so it just shows you the sort of size we are. Previously, that waste was going off-site. Now it's being used to generate 16% last year of our electricity on-site. That means that we also don't have the waste sludge materials that used to come from taking that waste off-site. We won the award that year for the best anaerobic digestion plant in the UK, but it took us 4 years to persuade the Environment Agency that the material that came off it wasn't waste and could go back onto farms. They actually shut their offices because they couldn't cope with people trying to do this sort of thing. Don't be put off if that's your experience. We ended up having a brilliant visit from the National Technical Officer from the Environment Agency, who helped us see how we could get through their mass of regulations and then get this out there. We then installed biomass. This is not the biomass that's been in the paper, I think just this week, where some of the big power stations are bringing it from Argentina or Mexico or wherever they're bringing it from. This was waste material available in Yorkshire next to our plant. It was wood that was chipped and put on the forest floor. We took that chipped material and we put it in a biomass boiler. We saved 90% of the emissions relative to natural gas. We've done the same thing down at Stowmarket, and again, we're saving 90% of the electricity there. In the interest of time, I'm going to let you see this afterwards. I'm going to skip past this one because that's just proof of the pudding that that farmers actually like this stuff as well. The point is, though, in terms of the art of the possible, read this one as well when you've got more time. The World Resources Institute now are saying that we can reduce by 73% our emissions in agriculture right now. How do they say we're going to do it? Well, plant-based diets, better yield, reduced fermentation, restoration of peatlands, etc. What they're saying is that you end up with a very little amount to offset. There are too many businesses now who are starting looking to offset. It's never the right thing to use somebody else's good work to offset the bad things that you're doing. That is the worst sort of offsetting. The Oxford Principles, which came out last year, said that you should be looking for more ethical sorts of offsetting. Offsetting for us is that we've got to the point now where you can have a sustainable product within your supply chain that can generate you the credits. We've validated that by reference to the Sustainable Agriculture Platform. And again, in the interest of time, as we're trying to cut down, I will just very quickly go through that to say that there is an international standard which is available, which enables businesses to describe the sustainability performance of your supply chain. We were the first maltster in the world to declare that we have 100% sustainable malt, 100% sustainable barley. Our competitors said, well, we don't believe it, so we got audited, and the auditor said they're correct. So, again, this art of the possible. Don't be put off by people who say that you can't do it, or you can't possibly be that good. There are some pictures which you can look at later in terms of the anaerobic digestion plant. Yes, it was a 6-year investment. Payback 5 years, longer than our 3 years that we needed. So, it was a difficult one perhaps initially to get past the board, but it saved all those 3,000 less tanker movements and produces a quality organic fertilizer. The biomass plant at Bridlington, just to underline the point, we didn't need to put our money into that. We used money from an external supply company because we wanted to spend our money on other capital projects. But to underline the point as well, I think, is that you're not alone when you're looking at these savings. So the fertilizer, which I said has already been reduced to 40%, already is likely to be carbon zero within 5 years with the technology that they're doing. That will reduce our embedded carbon, so we're not alone on it. The barley growing that we said is the biggest part of our carbon footprint, already we know that by putting in a cover crop, which is things like clover or vetch, even for 30 days between the crops, you think you'd never get any carbon removal from the atmosphere. It works, and we've had it proved. We're going to have carbon negative barley. We've got it this year, actually, but I'm not showing you the details. I'm saying within 5 years. That will mean we will have carbon credits available in our supply chain, which is a more ethical way, in my way of saying this is real carbon. You're taking more carbon out of the atmosphere than you are then balancing when you've grown it. So you neutralize the amount that you've grown and take some more out as well. Who wouldn't want to buy those credits? We've got brewers and distillers and maltsters falling over themselves to want to buy those credits from farmers. However, when we look at our supply chain, we only have 48% looking at heat generation for electricity, 8% considering hydrogen, and still only 48% thinking about carbon zero by 2050. Really, honestly, I'd say to the industry, it's got to get over itself and move. The electricity industry is doing great things in decarbonising by 2035, and 64% heat decarbonisation is possible. This is our latest one. This is the one where, if I don't stick to time, I'll be in great trouble because I'll miss the train to London, and hopefully we're going to win the award for this as innovation. Another 60% reduction. It is finished. It isn't a skeleton like that. If you drive past Stowmarket, you'll see it. So, almost there. I managed to recover 9 minutes of my presentation, so you can have your lunch on time. This is what we say to people now. This is what we think you should be doing as the art of the possible. Look at the energy efficiency. Yes. Measure it in detail, map the operations so that you know exactly where your carbon hotspots are. Go out and set a science-based target. It's dead easy though when I set it in 2010 because they give you lots of easy spreadsheets now. Don't be put off by it. And then look for specific and measurable change. It's there. It's there with existing technology. It's there supported sometimes by grants or sometimes not. Most of the work that we've done has not been supported by grants, I would say, because we're an SME and this is my whinge. We're just the wrong size to get grants. We're 300, so we tend not to use the grant system. But I love the grants that you were saying about the heat network. I think it's a brilliant move. I'm very, very keen to see that. And I'm interested to see how businesses with waste heat can link into those heat networks. It will be easier for us than trying to put electricity out on the grid because the grid's had it, hasn't it? So there we go. Drive your business strategy to address people, profit, and planet. And I think although we're 20 years late starting, we will get there. And we might overshoot to start with, but we've got the capability of bringing that climate change impact back. Thank you.